The unmistakable laugh, hair, and that look. Parks and Recreation's finale was almost 2 years ago, and yet when you meet this man, you want to call him Ron Swanson.
People I know mistakenly call me Ron.
It's a curse Nick Offerman happily lives with.
It's the world telling me I got very lucky.
After 7 seasons playing the deadpan, meat-eating, extremely masculine libertarian.
For the last 3 years, I have served as troop leader of the Pawnee Rangers. This is our handbook.
But Offerman will tell you there's a lot that separates him from the character. For example, he drove himself to this interview at a St. Louis woodshop, not because he despises interacting with the public like Ron Swanson.
I actually really always prefer to drive, because even if I ride in the passenger seat, I get car sick. So I'm also a weakling, unlike Ron.
The actor, comedian, and author says his days are a little more complicated than Ron's.
I wish my life were 1/10 that simple.
That said, the two do share a common love for woodworking. Listen as Offerman dissects the craftsmanship of the handmade coffee table on our set.
There are tenons, which is the piece of leg you see poking up through the tabletop.
Right.
That's round, and that's smarter because you can just drill a hole. Whereas I make mine square, which take a lot longer, and that's because I'm stubborn.
Offerman grew up around woodworking, and it helped pay the bills while this Illinois native was trying to make a name in Chicago's theaters and then in Hollywood.
Is that an edge bander?
Offerman's woodworking knowledge is on display in his latest title, Good Clean Fun, Misadventures in Sawdust at Offerman Workshop. That's right, Offerman runs a wood shop in LA that employs 6 people. You get to meet them in these pages, along with step-by-step guides on how to make some of the items they build there. That and a lot more in this entertaining, not-so-typical tutorial. We discuss it all.
But I look like a sheriff or something, but I'm really a ballerina.
Plus, what it feels like to come home to the Midwest.
God, I know where I'm at.
On this episode of Maryville Talks Books with Nick Offerman, presented by Maryville University and Left Bank Books, and media sponsors St. Louis Public Radio 90.7 KWMU and HEC TV.
Welcome to Goebel & Company Furniture in their wood shop.
Thank you.
I know it's not your wood shop in LA, but we thought the smell of sawdust would kind of set you at ease.
I'm drooling at the square footage and the size of machines they have here.
How does this compare? I mean, I know in your book you actually have a blueprint of your shop. I mean, how does this compare?
Well, these guys are apparently grown-ups. They have a forklift, which means they're wiser than us. Someday when I herniate one more disc, then I'll get a forklift. I feel like, I'd like to move in next door to these guys and we'd get along very well, and I'd probably learn something every day from them.
So what's great about your book is you have, there's part memoir in there, part tutorial. There's some pieces of wisdom from your sensei in it. But the tutorials go from a kazoo to a beautiful bed. It's the whole gamut, isn't it?
It is. Somebody working at a shop like this probably already knows everything that's in my book, but the fun thing about woodworking books, and the reason I tried to make this one fun, is that I'll read books where I already know that I can make the projects in the book, but you always pick up, we all are goofy in a slightly different way, so you can usually pick up at least 3 or 4 new ideas where you're like, well, this fly was pissing me off, so I sprayed a bunch of shellac on and my dad, instead of using a wedge under a door, he installs hook and loops on his doors because he's old. He doesn't want to bend over and mess with a wedge. So just little farmer tricks like that, I always like picking up.
Well, I'll say, I am not a woodworker, but I still enjoyed the book because of the stories that are in it with the people that you work with. What do you call them? That you call them your teammates in Sawdust?
Okay.
Yeah.
I call them a lot of things. Yeah, we generally refer to them as the elves because the world likes to think that not even that I'm making everything at the shop, but they actually like to think that it's my TV character making stuff at the shop, which of course is impossible. And I very openly always say, you know, like I was on Stephen Colbert the other night, and they say, Nick made us these coasters, and I said, actually, a fellow named Chris in my shop made those, and you know, it's my shop with people making stuff in it, and they always cut that out because, you know, it's better showbiz.
Right.
That's the idea, is we have these elves at the shop. I'm sitting here with you in St. Louis. They're making this stuff right now.
Well, so you said something just a minute ago that I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you've been in so many movies, so many shows, and yet I think probably most people know you as Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation.
Sure. You know, I'm a real person living my complicated life. You know, Ron is a sort of superheroic comedy character written by brilliant Harvard writers. And so when people say, oh, he's the same as Ron Swanson, I'm like, I wish my life were 1/10 that simple, but I'm a human being, and he's like a brilliant drawing that I just got to like voice, you know. So even in the creation of him, I'm thrilled that I got to speak those lines, but I understand that people know me the most as Ron, and that's great. I mean, it's great to have a part that is that effective.
But is it frustrating? I mean, do you get tired of people? I mean, I'm sure people say, hey, it's Ron Swanson. I mean, does that get old?
Sure. No, I mean, even people I know mistakenly call me Ron.
Really?
And sometimes they'll say, did I call you Ron 5 minutes ago? And I say, yeah, you did. It's okay. They don't mean anything bad by it, and it's the world telling me I got very lucky with a job.
So let's talk about some things that are different. I know in one of your books you say that unlike Ron Swanson, you've never been in a fist fight.
Right.
Right? Anything else?
You know, Ron lives by like 6 rules, and he lives in one place in Indiana, and he's never. We always said that he'd never been out of Indiana. That one time he drove across the Illinois state line and he got sick. He threw up and turned back. You know, his view of the world is incredibly myopic. And maybe, you know, I sort of grew up in that situation, and I couldn't stand it. And so I went into the arts, and I ended up moving to Chicago and then Los Angeles. I'm down with both France and Canada. I think they're great. Especially Canada. Like, I always when I go to Canada to do like a book tour or something, or a humor tour, the audience always says, we're sorry you hate us, or we love you even though you think we're terrible. And I always say, no, I love Canada, and I think Ron, if he ever got there and saw that it was just lakes and canoes and bears, and moose, he'd be like, oh, perhaps I misjudged this country. But you know, I'm also a massive sissy. I'm an artist. You know, I would rather.
You really look like a sissy. That's exactly how I would describe
that's
you.
That's the conundrum, is that I look like a sheriff or something, but I'm really a ballerina.
You talked about Illinois, which is where you're from, which is the great state just across the river from here. You've lived in so many places, visited so many places, but is there something about coming back to the Midwest?
Absolutely, yeah. I've done a lot of work in the Midwest in my career, and really you walk out of the airport and just the humidity hits you, and if it's warm out, then it's a bummer when the humidity hits you, but even so, it still feels like coming home. That's what you smell the first, like when you walk out of O'Hare in Chicago. It's an ugly airport driveway like any city, but the air, you're like, I know where I'm at. And it's near the North Shore neighborhoods, so the air also tastes expensive. You can tell. There's a Saks Fifth Avenue, within 7 miles.
Let's talk about why you wrote this book. So I heard somewhere or read somewhere that woodworking is what kind of centers you. It gets your head turned back straight, I think is what you said. And you were actually traveling a lot and doing a lot of work. I think you were doing a stage show with your wife, right? And you wanted to get back to the workshop, wanted to get back to the wood shop. Is that right?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to, in the last 2 years, we have spent 4 or 5 months touring a show together. I've spent a few months touring by myself, both doing comedy. And I did a play in Boston for 3 months. Last year, she was working in London and South Africa, and I was working in Calgary and Atlanta and touring the country. But we have a rule that we're never apart for longer than 2 weeks, which meant I was commuting quite arduously. And so we're having a good time. We're having a lot of fun doing these great jobs. But after a few years of that, we began to say, people would say, where do you guys live? And we'd say, well, we own property in Los Angeles, but we apparently live here in Budapest. And so, you know, not only was I missing the shop, I was just missing being at home. And I had the champagne problem that my career had gotten good enough. It's a weird conundrum because you're taking jobs that you could never imagine saying no to, and then after 8 of those, you think, oh, I'm going to have to start saying no to these offers I can't refuse if I want to see my home and my friends and my family. And part of that was, you know, we'd go back and forth to LA. It's not like we're gone for 3 solid years. And I always get to, you know, Megan gets mad because we get home and she just wants to chill out. But the first morning I'm up at 5 and like get to the shop and make sure everybody's taking good care of my chisels. Yeah, it's not a cognitive thing like I need this percentage of wood shop, this percentage of theater, and so on. It just is a natural, I don't know, I naturally became an adult performing and working in a shop, and I can tell when my hands start getting too soft. I'm like, oh geez, I'm going to turn into some sort of cognoscenti if I don't get back to my hammer.
A cognoscenti, by the way, is a person with superior, usually specialized knowledge or refined taste, a connoisseur. That was just one of the words I had to look up after interviewing Offerman. I guess you can add vocabulary to the long list of loves in the complicated life of this actor / comedian / author / woodworker.